Hello from London. My name is Cristián Rodríguez-Chiffelle, and I sit on the board and executive committee of Chapter Zero Chile, as well as being a member of the CGI Governing Board. And it is a great pleasure to be able to bring you closing remarks from a wonderful 24 hours focused on climate governance. The Climate Governance Initiative, CGI, a project in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, is driven by a community of non-executive directors focused on making climate a priority in the boardroom, building on the World Economic Forum's principles for effective climate governance. I would like to warmly thank all the networks of non-executive directors, our chapters, for organizing this wealth of sessions as part of our Global Summit. I would also like to draw your attention to a briefing for board directors, Ambition to Action, produced by the CGI, accompanying this summit, which highlights the role of board directors in translating company net zero targets into meaningful climate action. This, alongside numerous guidance and tools for non-executive directors, is available on the CGI website, climategovernance.org. This second annual Global Summit started in the Asia-Pacific region 23 hours ago, and discussion has followed the Earth rotation round to Europe and Africa on through the Americas, creating an opportunity for non-executive directors to hear how climate change is being addressed in the boardroom across different regions, countries, sectors, and industries. And the common thread throughout has been a recognition that climate change is a global emergency. It is happening now, and that boards have a crucial role to play in the necessary transition. Boards must take the lead in this. The summit was opened with a high-level panel on ambition to action, setting the tone for discussion throughout the event. Shai Ganu, global leaders for Willis Towers Watson's executive compensation and board advisory business, and Penny Bingham Hall, non-executive director of the Fortescue Metals Group, Dexus Property Group, Supply Nation, and the Crescent Foundation, discussed how boards are tackling climate change and where improvements needed to be made. Penny flagged the need to ensure we consider the role of nature to help address climate change alongside consideration of the energy transition, and that with so much discussion around what is green, we need to ensure we create more clarity with concise plans. Shai summed up the session with 5 succinct points. First, climate action should be integral to business activity. Second, it is about ESG, not CSR. 3, all interests need to be aligned to ensure successful business planning. 4, there are clear business benefits to tackling climate change. And 5, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. Shai then introduced a video message from Minister Grant Robertson, Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, who reiterated that the role of non-executive directors is essential, and fundamentally that it is time to turn from ambition to action. There is simply no time to waste. Many of the conversations that followed echoed the sentiment of the opening session, and let me walk you through them. So let's start with, almost 24 hours ago now, ASEAN and the Pacific that kicked off our summit. In New Zealand's Progress Towards Climate-Related Disclosures session, Michelle Embling explained that in 2023, around 200 New Zealand entities will be required to produce mandatory climate-related disclosures designed to help New Zealand meet its international obligations and achieve its target of net zero carbon by 2050. The discussion highlighted the need for a mindset shift to understand disclosure is not a nice to have, it's just a good practice and a board responsibility. The Agriculture Sector Challenges and Actions session hosted by Chapter Zero New Zealand, Climate Governance Initiative Central America and Caribbean, as well as Climate Governance Malaysia, provided a fascinating insight into climate action in the agriculture sector. The panel discussed the need for collaboration on a sector and regional level to address the significant challenges caused by climate change. Collaboration bodies for sugar and palm oil are now starting to focus on sustainability issues and not just trade. The ASEAN Climate Governance Network presented a session on what gets measured, how investors approach climate disclosure and metrics, noting that climate standards for listed companies are beginning to converge. Michelle Kaith Lim underscored that it's very clear boards have clear legal obligations to take climate action, and there is a need to ensure all directors take responsibility, not just the role of a climate director. It was agreed that the Science-Based Targets Initiative is a useful tool to set a robust target. ESG sustainability is not optional anymore. stock exchanges are also driving change in the region throughout increased disclosure requirements. The IISB efforts to align disclosure standards were welcomed with the recognition that boards should focus on the most material issues. Investors want credible data, external verification, and clear pathways in corporate reports, not just pretty pictures. In the Sustainable Financing, Sustainable Future panel, the ASEAN network scrutinized the area of green finance, which is growing at pace. More than 4 trillion of sustainable debt has been issued, according to Bloomberg NEF, with about 1.6 trillion in 2021 alone. But concerns have grown about the sustainability claims of these instruments, as well as whether the issues of sustainability-linked debt face meaningful penalties if they do not meet the targets embedded in the deal. The opportunity offered through corporate green bonds and consumer green financing, options such as mortgages and credit cards, were also discussed, recognizing that a range of green finance solutions are needed at scale. During the ASEAN Network session, Voices of Youth for a Cleaner and Greener Future, it was great to hear from those future generations whose lives will, of course, be affected most by climate change. Given that over half of the ASEAN population are under 35, this is a critical voice, particularly when the majority of young people recognize the need to act to address climate change. Young people are demanding purpose-driven jobs, often leaving mainstream careers to seek something more meaningful. Business can help provide a platform for ideas and innovation from young people to ensure deeper engagement and better access to opportunities to act. The final session of the ASEAN and Pacific region by Climate Governance Initiative Australia outlined how boards can best structure themselves to manage their oversight responsibility around climate change in sustainability or ESG committees, how to structure your board. It was suggested that sustainability committees can give directors a clear mandate to consider climate issues, but boards must ensure that these committees have touch points across the entire board, including other committees, for example, audit, risk, or remuneration. Authenticity is important. Boards should be able to show investors, consumers, and employees that they care about climate change. Boards are increasingly also focusing on other sustainability issues, such as risks to nature. There are some concerns that sustainability committees are simply pushing a difficult issue to the side. Though it is important to embed climate change across the entire board, these are complex issues that can benefit from more specific focus. Europe, Africa, and the Middle East came next. The conference then shifted into the second regional zone and the second of our Ambition to Action keynote panels. Emily Farnworth, head of the CGI Secretariat, spoke with Ángeles García Poveda, chairperson of the board of Litvack, to get her perspective on what boards are making good progress on and where more needs to be done. Ángeles highlighted some of her experience over 15 years with Litvack, recognizing that it is a journey from allowing climate action and broader ESG to develop from a focused, specific conversation to permeating the whole board and corporate culture. She acknowledged the need for discussion across the board and indicated that board members should be ambitious and stretch management enough to drive change, but not so much that commitments become empty promises. Her advice is to continue to ask questions to ensure there is a clear understanding around delivering a plan, and she acknowledged the value in peer-to-peer knowledge sharing through networks like the Climate Governance Initiative. Keeping the bar high on climate mitigation strategies was central to the collaborative panel discussions run by Chapter Zero Italy, Poland, Brussels, and Climate Governance Initiative Germany, considering Europe's energy transition amidst the recent and ongoing turbulence of first the coronavirus and subsequently the tilting of the global geopolitical chessboard. The view was that industry collaboration and engagement can play a role in pushing governments towards regulations and laws that will help manage these issues. Solving one of these issues can often help the others. For example, scaling up renewables can increase energy independence. This crisis highlighted that boards must be adaptable and quick to respond to issues, but also prepared and resilient to potential risks. From energy, the debate turned to the climate change challenge in the real estate industry and the board's responsibility and capacity building in engaging investors and protecting portfolios' values. The panel, convened by Chapter Zero Italy, pointed to the opportunity for the real estate industry, where 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from real estate assets. This session highlighted the key climate risks and opportunities for businesses in the real estate sector to take action and make their assets more resilient for the future. Alfredo Romano, independent advisor and expert in real estate asset management, stated that boards have a responsibility to revalue and future-proof their investment portfolios, and that governance is a central building block for effective climate risk and opportunity management. The panelists agreed that investors understand that long-term value is a result of sustainable investments, and that financial performance of investments is increasing with sustainable investment. In the next session, Chapter 0 Ukraine and Caucasus, in collaboration with Chapter 0 Poland, focus on how the CGI principles for effective climate governance can support corporates to overcome the regional economic and energy crisis in view of the current war in Ukraine. The Poland participants discussed the devastating impact of the war in Ukraine and the region, but highlighted the importance of sustainability and climate investments as prerequisites for the future economic growth, with regulations such as the European Green Deal playing a very important role. The panelists conveyed the real commitment to keeping effective climate governance on the agenda despite the geopolitical situation. In a session by Chapter 0 France and Chapter 0 Switzerland, the expert panel examined the power of the insurance underwriting in the climate transition. The discussion highlighted that insurance companies are doing well in relation to understanding the physical risk a company may be exposed to in 1 or 20 years' time. But the largest challenge the sector faces is the transition risk a company may be exposed to from areas such as carbon taxes and regulation. The panel expressed the importance of education throughout an organization, from the board through to the employees, as well as having transparent data as a common good. Monica Machler's advice to board members was to address climate with the attention and perspective it demands, particularly with a long-term view, with intermediate targets your company should meet. Antoine Denois, CEO at AXA Climate, had 3 clear questions for board directors to ask executive boards. First, how will your organization's physical assets be affected by climate change in 10 years' time? Second, give a clear definition of biodiversity and how it is an asset to the company. And third, are you able to present the new additional revenues that will arise from the climate transition? The importance and power of sustainability leadership was at the heart of the discussion organized by Climate Governance Initiative Germany, with passionate supervisory boards members from German companies in the session Germany, Climate and People, putting passion into board practice. Panelists made the case for bold targets and being clear that climate change must be at the center of a holistic strategy. Michael Basilidis argued that non-executive directors of supervisory boards were in the position to drive sustainability and ESG, although their role has been traditionally to control. It is the responsibility of non-executive directors and supervisory boards to select the right people, then to drive change through incentivization and ensure that climate is an integral part of the strategy and the change in business models. Panelists discussed the importance of stakeholder engagement, inviting the whole company to be involved, and ultimately taking responsibility together with the regulators and the politicians, given the climate challenge is the responsibility of each and every one of us to solve. Chapter 0, the UK chapter, hosted an interactive session where all participants joined the fictional board of a global food manufacturing company and time traveled to 2030 to make real-time strategic decisions for this company over the upcoming decade. In this scenario game, the outcomes of the board's votes were discussed by a panel comprised of non-executive director with significant food manufacturing experience, a lawyer, an investor, and a climate expert in the food industry. Key takeaways included the importance of integrating climate across all company activities, the value in getting ahead of the game, for example, by acting before regulation comes into place, and to avoid transition risks, and the fact that boards should be looking at climate and sustainability as opportunities, not just as risks. Engagement was of paramount importance in the Nordic Board Impact Forum, Strategic Integration of Sustainability, accelerated by engaged and active owners webinar. The panel gave examples of key drivers of such company owners doing good, which include having a long-term vision, value-based leadership, loyalty, and giving wealth back to the community. Targets, metrics, and more complex measures like internal carbon pricing were also cited as useful in addressing climate change. The panel agreed that board governance of all companies, including those that are family-owned, has evolved over time and will continue to do so. It is a long journey, which requires a hard push from the beginning and only possible with the buy-in from both the owners and the board. The final session of the European, Africa, and Middle East region, run by Chapter 0 Italy, took a regional approach to the question, should your board consider a say-on climate vote to the next AGM? Investors are looking for more engagement on climate strategies and are becoming more active in analyzing the transition to net zero. This session reviewed in the key dynamics around the say-on climate vote in Europe based on research by Georgetown, including results, proxy advisors' policies, and emerging trends. The panel also consisted of representatives from Atlantia SPA, Ferrovial, and Royal Dutch Shell, who provided their organizational motivations and implications of holding an open vote on climate strategy at the annual general meeting. Andreas Borg's advice to board members is to be aware that the say on climate vote is a large amount of work for both management and the board. Ensuring you have a good reason to proceed with it is vital, whether it's a need to share the climate risks and opportunities with your shareholders, or if there's a trust issue, which may need more in-depth dialogue from the board's perspective. The panel concluded that board members have a lot of instruments to use to ensure the climate agenda is appropriately addressed in their organization, and that the say on climate vote may be used as an additional instrument and a communication tool by the board and the company. Now, let's move to the Americas. We then reached the final region in our summit, the Americas, and Antonia Gowell, head of climate action at the World Economic Forum and governing board member of the CGI, hosted a discussion with Rahul Bardawaj, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Institute of Directors, and Clarissa Lenz, founding partner of Catavento Consultoria. The shared view was that business, rather than governments, are driving the climate agenda in Brazil and North America, although regulation will be critical for systemic change. The Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, in the US is the sort of legal framing needed to drive investments. The big challenge for boards at the moment is the many conflicting priorities they are having to deal with across the short and the long term. Tools like carbon pricing can be extremely effective in leveling the economy and assist in driving climate action. More discussion and awareness of the opportunities associated with climate action will also be very helpful. Finding new products and services can help make the business case. Directors need more information and examples of the how, not the what. Being connected with other leaders to exchange experience is critical. Overall, regulation and education are critical for the scale of the change needed. Chapter 0 Brazil's first session examined how boards can play a key role in advancing proposals and solutions for the sustainable development of the Amazon rainforest, considering its importance for humanity and the global economy. Professor Carlos Nobre and Professor Dolores Armenteras give the global physical and economic risks associated with further deforestation of the Amazon rainforest and emphasize the necessity of engagement with the private sector to ensure we do not push the Amazon past the tipping point and not align with the Paris Agreement. Professor Mercedes Bustamante stated that the carbon market will be crucial to fight climate change and signal the financial importance of the Amazon. It will ensure companies are held accountable and can also benchmark against others in the sector to drive innovation and emissions reduction. Professor Jeffrey Sachs highlighted the power of the BRICS and BICs in the international scene and how they can use their diplomatic weight to push the importance of the Amazon in the macro equilibrium system. Fabio Barbosa, CEO at Natura & Company, also emphasized the need for industries to mobilize and work together to put pressure on the public sector to drive the regulation required to protect the Amazon. Fabio gave practical advice to board members to look at short and long-term trends that affect your business, for example, regulation, employee concerns, etc. He expressed how taking climate action and protecting the Amazon is good business in terms of attracting young talent, investors, and consumers. In the next session, the US chapter, NACD US Climate Initiative, and Chapter 0 Canada examined the implications for boardrooms associated with the climate-related disclosures proposed by the SEC in the US and CSA in Canada. Both planned to be finalized by the end of the year. Stephen Rothstein from Sirius had two words for board directors: get ready. Stephen asked the participants if the proposed rules for the SEC and CSA were published now. If they were published now, Do their companies have the right committee structures in place to address them, as there is an enormous amount of interest from investors in these rules? The panel agreed that board education is critical, and the entire board should have a baseline understanding of climate risk and opportunity, reiterating a point made in one of the sessions from the ASEAN Climate Governance Network earlier today, that the responsibility should not fall to the so-called climate director, but across the whole board. If you are a board director that will be affected by the incoming regulation from SEC and CSA, I will highly, highly recommend viewing the recording for this session, which gives practical advice to board directors on how to approach these incoming disclosure rules and examples from the panelists' own experience of starting the climate journey in their boardroom. A practical aid to support board members to engage and address climate change in the boardroom was the focus of the next session, which gave an overview of the Brazilian climate change collective book currently being written by the 10 civil society entities that participate in Chapter Zero's Brazil's Influencers and Supporters Committee, and promises to be an instrumental and practical aid to support board members. This session included a detailed conversation on the advantages of integrated reporting and the need to provide both financial and non-financial narratives to form the sustainability narrative. There was a call to review KPIs so that they are updated and reflect the value of natural capital, to stop concentrating on sustainability as a cost to the bottom line. The panel concluded that the arrival of mandatory reporting flood climate disclosure in the region will force companies away from greenwashing their disclosures for competitive advantage and ensure meaningful climate action. Chapter Zero Mexico took a regional approach to looking at developments in tourism from the Glasgow Declaration to climate action towards a net zero, nature positive tourism industry in Latin America. The panel gave an update on the achievement of climate action in the tourism sector in Latin America 1 year after the Glasgow Declaration of COP26, and examined the challenges to achieve pathways: measure, decarbonize, regenerate, collaborate, and finance. Specific lens was applied in the Brazilian contribution to tackling climate change. What is the role of boards? Session, in which the panel addressed the competitive differentials of Brazil with a comparatively cleaner energy matrix, the Brazilian contribution to climate change, the creation of a regulated national carbon market, and the transition of the economy, as well as the role of corporate, national, and global governance in combating the climate emergency. In Water 4.0, a way for boards to face climate risk in Chile and move towards water security, Chapter Zero Chile, my own chapter, webinar examined the role of boards in meeting the water scarcity crisis in Chile and around the world, emphasizing the role of boards as stewards of the long-term prosperity of the organizations they oversee. Chile is naturally water-rich, yet due to climatic, regulatory, and management facts, the water crisis jeopardizes access to clean water and sanitation. The country's poverty reduction, food security, and economic growth targets within the framework of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, underlining the scale of the global challenge posed by climate change and the urgent needs for boards to act. Chapter Zero Mexico raised the important question of financing the transition to net zero, a reality check, in which the webinar set out the reality of Mexican SMEs working to implement their transition plans to net zero and the difficulties in financing such a transition. The panel reviewed the options currently available in the Mexican market and proposed alternatives for countries that have contributed the most in CO2 emission historically, to fulfill their obligations under the Paris Agreement, to finance such a transition in countries that historically have had a marginal contribution to CO2 emissions. Climate change beyond borders was the focus of the final regional session by NACD US Climate Initiative, Chapter Zero Canada, and Chapter Zero Mexico in Climate Change Beyond Borders, incorporating supply chains into your boardroom climate strategy. Supply chain strategy has become a critical issue for boardrooms across North America, as organizations are challenged with transportation bottlenecks, political risk, sustainability concerns, and increased trade barriers. Furthermore, the new rules for climate disclosure proposed by governments and financial regulators across North America are prompting boardrooms to reevaluate how these rules might impact their current supply chains and climate strategy, with the potential move to report on Scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions. With supply chain emissions, Scope 3, being the largest contributor to emissions, Boards are reassessing their supply chain footprints as part of their climate change strategy. Given increasing expectations around ESG performance, sustainability practices are being scrutinized by all stakeholders, meaning companies that can reduce Scope 3 emissions can have a strategic advantage when it comes to access to capital and financial performance. Complementing the webinars and roundtable discussions, an additional 3 roundtable discussions were organized by the INSEAD Corporate Governance Center, BCG, and Hydrogen Struggles, exploring how boards are dealing with the strategic implications for the companies for which they provide oversight. The insights from these 3 discussions in the Asian and Pacific region, European and African and American regions will contribute to the next edition of Boards ESG Pulse Check to understand how boards are going beyond relying on published ESG reports and metrics and rather bringing an entirely new lens to strategy based on a forward-looking view of how the world is changing and how the company should adapt. So we have heard 22 chapter-led sessions, 3 keynote conversations. There have been also 3 affiliate events and an opening keynote address, and a total of 119 speakers contributing over 23 hours. I would like to thank the Climate Governance Initiative chapters for their remarkable contribution and inspiring debate and exchange. I would like to also thank our high caliber speakers who have highlighted the important role of board directors in the transition to the net zero economy and raised the level of ambition while sharing real world examples of how to integrate climate governance into company strategy. Let me finalize with what we believe are the key takeaways from our summit. First and foremost, climate change is happening now. Boards have an important contribution to resolving this global climate challenge. And the next 3 years are key to reaching targets by 2030. Climate action, climate-related opportunities and risks need to be at the heart of board decisions, with climate standing agenda on the board agenda. Ask your companies whether they have a transition strategy and whether they are measuring their impact on emissions, including through the supply chain. Start to monitor progress on this. Collaboration will be central to success. Ask your companies who they will partner and collaborate with. You personally can take action today by joining your local chapter if you have already not done so. And by telling your local chapter, if you are already a chapter member, how you're shifting the dial in the board discussions of the companies you serve. Sharing examples of climate governance practice will inform best practice and inspire others to act. Our vision at the Climate Governance Initiative is that a critical mass of boards proactively govern their organizations to ensure they fully contribute to resolving the global climate challenge. We invite you to be a part of this critical mass. Please take what you have heard at the summit into your boardrooms and be part of the global network of non-executive directors who are moving boards from ambition to action. Thank you all for your participation today, from whichever region or time zone of the summit you have been able to join us. And thank you in advance for what you will bring to your boardroom. I would like to leave you with some final words from our chairman, Karina Litvack, from the Climate Governance Initiative Governing Board. Thank you very much, and hope to see you very soon at our next summit.
Thank you, Cristián. Hello again, this is Karina Litvack, your chairman of the Climate Governance Initiative. And I want to thank you all so very much for joining us over these last 24 hours. As you know, the topic of today's or this year's summit has been from ambition to action. And our goal in going through all of these excellent, thought-provoking sessions with you has been to give you the tools that you need to take the ideas that have been floating in your head and turn them into practical actions in your board meetings when you go back to work. I want to remind you, if even it is necessary, climate change is a global emergency. We all know that. We all know that business plays plays a crucial role in solving this problem. We can't do it alone, but government can't do it alone either. And boards must lead. If you're like me, you worry about this issue, it keeps you up at night, but you sometimes feel overwhelmed about how to actually convert ambition into action. We're very hopeful that with what you've heard these last 24 hours and with the array of tools that the Climate Governance Initiative has developed for you, that you will have what you need to work with your colleagues in your boards, to work with your management, and to draw inspiration from fellow directors around the world and other experts in our network to really make a difference and enable your companies to position themselves for resilience and success in a zero carbon world. If you've missed any sessions, don't worry. Most of them are going to be available on recording, and you'll be able to watch them at your leisure. You'll be able to share them with your colleagues. These are tools that we want you to use and reuse again. We would love to hear your feedback. So at the bottom of the screen, there will be information on how you can get in touch with us. And most of all, we look forward to working with you in the months and years ahead. This is going to be a very, very big challenge, the biggest challenge that any of us has ever faced. And we are honored to be able to work with you to face up to it. Thank you very much and good luck.